This is one of the favorite games that I played this summer, and it came at the end of the summer at the Tata Steel Women's Rapid and Blitz tournament in India. It was my final stop before heading back home, and I was black against Polina Shuvalova. She's one of the top Russian female players. I faced her earlier in the summer in the World Cup, where she knocked me out in the third round. So this was, I think, the final game of the day. It's a 15-minute game. So she plays e4, I played c5, and I played e6 here, kind of avoiding her bishop b5 check lines. c3, not a big surprise that she doesn't go into the open Sicilian. She already tried this line with c3 earlier on in the tournament, so I had a bit of an idea of what I wanted to do against it, and I will let you know where my knowledge ends. We got to this position. I'm allowing her to capture on c6 and compromise my pawn structure a bit, but at the same time, my position is quite solid and I have the pawn majority. So that's where my knowledge ended. And okay, here I'm just developing normally. I want a castle. And white has to play quite energetically to show an advantage here, which she didn't exactly remember how to do, but the move c4 is the best. You basically have to pose the question to the knight immediately. Obviously, the knight is my best piece. And now I have two choices of where to go. Not sure what I would have done. Knight b4 is the best move. According to the computer, it threatens knight d3 check. And white has a few options here, but like, for example, if they go bishop c3, we trade queens. They don't have like an ideal response because rook d1, there's actually a capture on a2 possible. And king d1 is obviously not perfect either because that's not really where the king wants to be. He's still going to be a bit vulnerable in the center. And then we can go with c5. And actually, that is a pawn sacrifice because if they take, we just give up the pawn, but we activate the rook and we activate our bishop. We have really good development. We're going to castle a queenside next and have fine play here. So let's see. Go back to this position. So c4, if I go knight e5, there's some interesting lines here. So for example, she goes queen c2. The point of that move is to help the bishop develop more actively. And now if I go c5, which is of course my idea in general, I mean, I need to do something for this bishop, there's actually a really strong move here for white, which is the move knight e5. Placing this knight actively, I mean, it's a little bit surprising in the sense that, you're moving the same piece in the opening twice and you haven't yet developed all your minor pieces or castled. So why would that be a good idea? Well, it's actually a prophylactic move. It's against the move bishop b7, because now if black develops the bishop there, then this check is really annoying. And you basically have no good answer to the check, because obviously you don't want to go king f8. But you also don't want to go knight d7 and put yourself in a pin. You're going to be just in huge, huge trouble after that. So you're basically stopping black from going bishop b7. And if black castles, then you can do something like bishop c3, bishop b7, bishop d3, or actually I probably did it in the wrong order. Let's not blunder knight c6, right? Let's go queen c7. Bishop c3, castles, bishop d3. And in this position, white actually gets like a very nice, attacking setup. Because they can castle short, they can also castle long. But you can sort of see how beautifully their bishops are placed on the long diagonals, how their knight is entrenched on e5. So black has some decent things about their position too. I mean, I also have like a nice looking bishop, right? But I would say, okay, this bishop is more passive than white's bishop on c3. And therefore, and white just has like kind of the play on the king side that black doesn't have. So the point is that white really does want to play this opening with a lot of energy. And therefore, they got to start with c4. But yeah, after knight b4, though, that's a way better move than knight f6. So we should probably be doing okay. By the way, bishop d3, which I thought she might do in the game, it would be great to have the bishop there, but you can't really do it because of the discovered attack, and then the knight gets into d3, and then you're gonna have to give up that bishop anyway. So she played bishop e2. I mean, I remember in the game I was very happy to see that mild move. I just didn't feel like it was putting much pressure on my position. I thought about, well, what I should have thought about was putting my queen on c7 immediately. And in a rapid game, it's hard to get into these kinds of details, like why queen there, why not just something obvious like castles. But the idea is just don't let them play knight e5. And there were a few moments in this game where she could have tried to put that knight on e5. And one of them was here. She castled. I played c5. I mean, in general, these are very sensible moves. But so she does have this like knight e5 idea where she could try to just have like the knight be a bit more active. She played c4. Again, I have both retreats. She was expecting, I think, knight b4 more. Perfectly good move, maybe even better. It's hard to say. But I didn't see anything wrong with knight b4. Obviously, my knight can always be, rerouted to c6 and controlling d4 square. But I thought this was okay as well. And, I mean, yeah, she really should try something like knight e5. Bishop c3, at least have the active knight, right? And she played h3, and this move is just a little too lackadaisical, right, to like pose black problems. So, I mean, I was getting happier and happier with my position as I felt like I developed all my pieces, I solved the problem of the light squared bishop, and there really was no pressure on my position. So here I was feeling very comfortable. And this is where things start to get interesting. I mean, you can play any move you want, actually. You can play like rook d8, right? I mean, that, in my opinion, that's like the most obvious move. If you want a simple game, you put the rook on the only open file on the board. There's probably going to be a bunch of trades on the d file, and it's going to end in a draw. And the thing, though, is that I really wanted to create like an interesting game. Sometimes just as a chess player, you don't want to just play regular, decent moves, right? Like you want to get some chances to create something on the board. And so I came up with this idea that I thought was like a lot more interesting than just trading pieces. I played knight e4. Well, that move is pretty obvious, but the next move is maybe less obvious, right? So she goes bishop e3, and she's still not really feeling the danger. I mean, probably she would have gone to c1 if she would have felt the danger of like what I was trying to do. And the point of knight e4 was actually to unblock the f-pawn. And so this was the concept. And this move, by the way, guys, when I kind of hit on this idea, I felt like, oh, that's really cool. It's never completely obvious, to play a move like f5 because you're leaving this pawn behind, right? That's a backwards pawn, I mean, until it moves. And obviously you're weakening your structure a bit. So it is a pretty big decision. On the other hand, I felt like, hey, I have a pawn majority on that side of the board, 4 against 3. It does make, logical sense to try to play there. And it's just way, way more ambitious, right, than like playing regular moves like rook d8 and bishop f6 and so on. So I played f5, and I also feel like when this happens in a game, you have to kind of see it as a wake-up call for white. I mean, like your opponent's letting you know, like they're not just playing for a draw. Like so there's definitely like a psychological effect. She probably should have played like knight d2 immediately to challenge my strong knight. And I understand like psychologically it's not so easy to do because you're thinking, oh, this bishop, it could kind of get trapped at some point. Of course I can't, I mean, and I could actually play f4. So I think she didn't like the fact that I could play f4, and after, knight takes, let's say pawn takes, like obviously black has great compensation for the pawn. Black's not winning, actually, but they're two bishops, they're really good queens, you give them good compensation. She didn't like this line, but maybe she should have just acquiesced to it. Because what she did instead was she played bishop c1, right? So you see I told you that like she could have gone there immediately. Well, she winds up going there just a move later. It's obviously a loss of a tempo. So now I improve my position like that. Very happy to put my bishop from a diagonal where he stares into my own pawn to a nice long diagonal. Actually, both of my bishops now are on the long diagonals. And she goes rook fe1. Now we have an interesting moment. I was definitely in an aggressive mood, so I thought I should be attacking on the king side in the long run. And I figured, well, I can't really start any king side attacks with that rook on a8. So I played here, which is a very decent move, supporting the e-pawn. But there's one other move here that I was always it was always in the back of my mind that it could be a very useful move. And I never did wind up playing in the game, but the computer approves of it, right? And I wanted you to kind of see it. It's the move a5, right? So what is so impressive about this pawn move? Basically, it is a useful move, guys, to clamp down on the b4 square. Now, you might say, well, why is that useful? I mean, they're not really going to play that move now, are they? Yeah, they're not going to play it right now, but you're going to be surprised at how many scenarios can actually occur in the game where white could think about that type of move to get some counterplay. So a5 just clamps down on that idea. Plus if they ever do push a pawn, obviously they can't really, do that yet. But if they do push a pawn, you have a4 ready. So basically, black is saying, look, I'm not rushing. I can play on every part of the board, and I'm going to do some prophylaxis on the queen side. That's what that's about. And then, for example, well, it's hard for white to find a move, right? Like white can do things like that. And then we can play something like this. Another, patient little pawn move controlling g5. It's really hard to play for white. I wouldn't recommend this position. One of white's main defensive ideas that is going to keep coming up is this type of exchange sacrifice. White is actually in such bad shape that they really should be thinking about just sacking some material to neutralize, black's active pieces. So here they have a pawn for the exchange, but fortunately black's pawn is not yet there. It's not, blocking the bishop. So black in the game changed a lot with this exchange sack, but black should still be decently better with chances to play for a win, right? It's obviously a technical position now rather than an attacking position, but we can try to trade pieces, and white doesn't have quite enough for the exchange. And if they don't do this exchange sack, it's just hard for white to even move anything. It's hard to play without a center, guys, actually. That's one of the lessons. So, okay. Well, I didn't play a5. I played rook a8. It's very close to, a5 in terms of strength. And she plays bishop d3. And this is where I start to go wrong. Yeah, I should have played this move h6, basically just being patient. And instead, I played the move queen c6. Definitely a mistake. We kind of both believed it, though. What we believed was that, yeah, you can't really take my knight because something bad is going to happen to you on that diagonal. But actually, if you go a little bit further and you just move the knight, then you realize, well, I can't really push the pawn because I get mated on h7. Right, and meanwhile, by the way, notice how my structure is not like it used to be. Now I got these double isolated pawns in the center. I'm still doing okay because I got this strong bishop attacking f2, and she's got to go rook e2. She goes knight there, then there's some big tactics on the board, so she's got to go here, and black is actually still fine. The bishop on d4 is really powerful. Even if I lose this pawn, there's a lot of play. But basically, I was giving her the chance to do this, and in hindsight, I think that was a mistake, to allow my opponent to kind of ruin my structure in the center that way. So best move actually would have been, again, this h6 move. Patient move, stopping knight g5 ideas, and yeah, if she wants to sacrifice the exchange, she can do that. And if she tries to trade, my knight, obviously I don't have to just trade off all the pieces. Like, this move is very interesting. And I'm actually threatening not only the mundane bishop d4, but the more flashy knight takes h3, pawn takes, and then bishop d4, with like this huge threat of queen g3 coming in. So, I mean, there's a pretty powerful attack going on here on the king, right? That's what happens when you have like open diagonals for your bishops, when you have a lot of pieces on that side of the board, and you have more space, right? And this pawn is doing a very effective job at like not letting these pieces really play. So that would have been a better move for me, h6. Queen c6 was definitely like a misstep, but she also kind of, you know, didn't realize that taking this knight was possible, so she went back. And really my best move here would just be to go back and then fix my mistake with h6. But okay, I mean, in my mind, I didn't really see h6 as an idea, I guess, yet. So queen c7, bishop d3 would have looked like it's a repetition. I didn't want that. So what did I do? Well, I went a bit overboard, guys, you know, in my aggressive mindset. And I was like, let's go with a g-pawn. And of course, it does look really aggressive, guys, but it's also, it's very committal, right? Because I'm really now opening up my own king. And yeah, we all have dreams of, you know, going g4 one day, but it's not so one-sided. So she plays bishop d3, and she is threatening again to take my knight and then take my pawn. And I start to feel like, hey, maybe I've just gone a little too far. I played knight d6, and the game actually ended in a repetition. So she played bishop f1, and I played knight e4, and that was it. And what's interesting about this position, though, is that white can actually try to play. Like, it's no longer like, you know, where only black is the one who has the play. And the way that white can play is this move b4, which I saw, but when I talked to her, I think after the game, I'm pretty sure this move was not on her radar. So, I mean, it's slightly unusual, but the thing is, I'm so committed on the king side that it's a very common idea, right? To just like blast open, let's say, this is kind of the center still, because you're trying to open like the c pawn up. And by the way, that shows you, right, why it would have been really nice to have that pawn on a5, because suddenly b4 is actually a viable pawn sack for white. And what she's trying to do is just open up another front of play. And after I take, she has two moves. I mean, she can go c5, or she can go bishop b2. And of course, you know, the game it's complicated, but the basic premise of this pawn sack is like black's king is weak as well. It's actually maybe weaker than white's king. And also there's like that square that she's trying to get into. So what do I really have like with this extra pawn? I mean, it's not very easy for me to use it at this moment. But yeah, I'll have to watch out for, you know, g5 squares, like e5 squares for this whole game, c5 push. So this was actually quite an interesting way for my opponent to try to keep the game going. So yeah, some extra prophylaxis in this game would have been a good idea for me. And yeah, sometimes, you know, you feel like you should be making the most aggressive possible moves, right? But you have to kind of tread a fine line, right, between aggressive and weakening. And even though I felt like, oh, I'm so brave, you know, pushing that g-pawn, I kind of quickly realized, well, you know, that's not necessarily the most powerful approach to this position, right? And it's like maybe just play a modest move h6 and kind of point out to your opponent that they really don't have much they can do here. I mean, because black does have a nice position. But anyway, why I like this game, guys, obviously it ended in a draw, and there were not like fireworks in the end, although I tried. You know, I tried to make it happen. But what I liked about it was how we have this kind of like simple looking position, right? Not much is going on. And then you find a plan where you can really cause some big problems for your opponent. And the basic idea is paying attention to the pawn structure. Where do you have a pawn majority is very often where you want to be able to create play. So that's really what helped me figure out that, like, look, I can afford to push my F pawn, kind of weakening my structure, because it's really hard for white to get an attack on e6, and it's really hard for white to get a knight into e5. So kind of looking at this position in a concrete way, I realized, okay, I can afford the downsides of that pawn push, but I can create that space, and that space, supports my knight. It allows my bishop to also get like a really nice square. And there were lots of ideas in this game as well, of like me even like pushing the e-pawn in some scenarios. So yeah, you want to look at those ambitious kinds of ways to build up space and use your pawn majorities in chess, guys.